talking about like measuring design. And so for a lot of designers, that's really, really hard. It's hard for design, period, because we think about what we do and we're asked to like connect what we do to the business. Now, of course, it's important. We have to remember that our work is really about execution. All of that process, design thinking and everything. Hope you don't mind I have notes.
Thanks, Kevin, so much for coming to Écru Dot. Give us a little bit of thinking and telling us like how is your journey look like as a product designer leader. So I'm very curious how you become a product designer. What is your journey look like?
Yeah. First of all, thank you for having me. This is really amazing to be, part of your community. So really, the journey started with academic background as an industrial design. Yeah. So that was such a great foundation for user-centeredness and research and everything about the process of, prototyping and iteration. All the things we call today like design thinking, right? So it really was a great foundation, and I consider the beginning of my career when I started an agency with some friends and colleagues, a bunch of co-founders of the company here in Silicon Valley. In fact, right here in Mountain View. So we did a lot of work back then, everything from marketing to campaigns to learning content, eventually e-commerce. And in fact, we were known a lot for digital video and animation in 3D. Yeah. That really transitioned us to websites, the first wave of websites. And the great thing was we were learning it along with everyone else. That was a very exciting time. And we got to the point where we pivoted into software. And so that was really the first time doing like real product development, understanding what customers needed from the type of software that we were developing. But that was fun. That lasted for a couple of years after our agency times, working for other companies. And a lot of us wanted to get back to hands-on design, like back to making, back to creativity and the technology. And so the next phase of my career was all about freelancing and consulting, getting back on the tools, and working with a lot of range of customers. And that led into working for a number of startups as well. So that was a big part of what I call the kind of middle phase of my career. And then, like many other people, wanted to try out different things, and eventually started working in-house at larger companies, leading product and design.
That's very cool. What is your feeling like working in different domain and different size of company?
My experience is pretty typical to what you hear about working at agencies and working for small and mid-sized company, and then working for large companies as well. Obviously, agencies are what you hear about a lot, right? You're working for other people, you have clients, and depending on the type of agency, it could be very much like a development partner with the company, or it could just be an extension and you're acting as a resource. So, there's pros and cons to working in that environment, but very typical of like, you have to scope out the work with the clients, and you build and you design, and most of the time you move on. You work on another project. Some designers that work in agencies get to work in a specific industry or specific clients, and some just work across lots of different types of projects. That was our experience, the way that we operated back in the day. Startups, again, very much like a lot of things that you hear, very scrappy, very fast, less overhead, less process, hopefully less politics and bureaucracy. And the best case scenario for designers is that you get to wear all the hats. You get to do all the things, and you really get to move fast, right? Again, pros and cons, right? I'd start with the pros is you usually have the opportunity to like do deeper work. You get more involved. You're involved with the iteration. You're involved with the measurement and the success, continuing to improve products a lot of times. You usually have the benefit of working with other people that represent more specific disciplines and get more specialized, everything from user research to data analytics. And that's really the big benefit to working at a mid-size or larger company, is you get to work with people and learn alongside them as well.
What motivates you actually jumping from like agency to large corp? What is that experience different from each other?
Yeah, I think I just kind of hinted a little bit. I also had this interest in just trying out different things as well. Yeah. The agency world was a lot of fun and a lot of variety, so a lot of great things there. But really that motivation happened in like that that transition was more from the middle part of my career. Working as a freelancer was great. You have all that flexibility. And then, of course, working with startups, I always recommend to people, if you have opportunity at some point in your career, it's different for different people, but to try to have that experience. That was great, but what you hear about startups, it's like it's either slow to see success or low chances of success. Yep. And I just personally got to a point in my career where I felt like a lot of what I was doing personally was like on a repeat loop. It's like just doing the same thing over and over and over. And so when I wanted to reach the next level of my career, management and having more authority, more accountability, that really only happens when you work on more projects at scale, right? You hear that a lot, but it's true. Like having that larger impact really comes with having that deeper involvement with the work and being able to iterate on it.
For sure. And you have been in the industry for over like 20 plus years, right? Do you see some movement and changes in the designer role? And how do you predict how the designer role will become in the future as well?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. My cohort or my colleagues or my generation of designers go all the way back to the 90s, right? And it was a great time. Look, I tell people today, we had it much easier than all the design industry has it today. For one thing, there was just a lot less designers. And I say another really important thing to think about going all the way back then was design and technology was even more intertwined than it is today. The impact that we had on companies, it more so leaned on the creative aspects of it. So everybody was trying to be very creative, both in the design work that we were doing and in the technology that we were doing. There's a little bit of hints of that today, obviously, and the way technology is going. I'd say the mid-2000s was really the growth of this thing we call design thinking, and that was great, right? There's a lot of good things and bad things that happened out of that. On the positive side, design definitely had a bigger impact on companies, bigger impact on the direction of products. A little bit on the negative side, we had this thing, and there's this big phrase that everyone is a designer. That sounds great, but it's a little bit of disservice to designers. We essentially invited people to do a lot of things that, the value that we brought as designers, like that empathy and that real prototype mindset. But, that leads us today, right? I think in the last 15 years or so, overall design has absolutely matured, and that's really great. There's a lot more practitioners across many different spectrums. But there's also good and bad of it, right? There's more specialization that happens. And I think just the nature of the fact that in technology companies, just the structure of the EPD team, right, the engineering, product, and design team, there's just more of them. And so because of that, there's been some experiencing of more siloing of what we do. Still positive on where we're going. I think the takeaway for me to share is that as a designer and as what we do, it's all about reinvention. We have to keep evolving what we're doing, evolving with the times, the technologies. It's very hard to predict. That's really just the takeaway of what we can do.
And I know during that journey, you have earned more than 20 plus patents on different technology. Can you share a little bit behind the scene? What does the story look like?
Yeah, thanks for that question, because I don't get asked it a lot about patents. So first of all the patents that I co-authored with many other people were all part of when I worked at Verizon. Most people think about Verizon as the phone company, but a very large technology company as well. And I always joke that it had nothing to do with the phone company. I don't know how to fix your phone service. And it was all about technology. Now, a lot of the patents were around user experience and really taking advantage of the mobile platform, the mobile network. Some of the core things around identity, authentication, security, but also a lot around content experiences and e-commerce. I'd say my favorite story is a time when, I should also mention, it was our job. We were an in-house innovation team. It was literally our job to come up with ideas, explore ideas, test ideas. And of course, almost everything we came up with were written up as patents, right? So that's part of the business side of it. But one of the fun projects we worked on was we did a lot of research at the time on what was called cord cutters. So this was a transition when a lot of people, consumers, were deciding whether or not they should stop using cable services and all the proliferation of streaming services, which are great. And now we're kind of going backwards, by the way. But that was a great time. And we did a lot of research. And our team actually built an entire mobile app, video consumption app, to test out some of the features we developed around clip sharing, live chatting, things like that. And a lot of the work that we did influenced a very large Verizon video mobile app I'll ask a lot of you people here, like, this project was called Go 90. Just raise your hands. Anybody ever heard of it? No, I didn't think so. This was going back around, I think it was 2015. And now remember, we were an innovation team. We were just over here building ideas. This team that built the product, no shade on them, but hundreds of people to build this product. And there's an amazing Wikipedia page about it. Verizon spent $1.2 billion on development, content strategy, and marketing. And it was a failure because of their content strategy and the way they marketed a very, very specific target audience, which were millennials at the time. Now, it was actually a really cool product. It's too bad that happens. I share that as a takeaway of, like, in your career, you're going to work on lots of things that sometimes never see the light of day or have a short life. And that you have to be okay with that, right? There's going to be certain things you're proud of, but there's going to be a lot more work that doesn't make it to your portfolio.
So I think, like, one of the things we keep saying, and probably, like, as a design leader as well, is, like, bring the impact as a designer to the table. Can you share what kind of lessons you have learned? What are some of the crucial moments in your career to design for impact?
Yeah, design for impact. So a lot of times when you hear design for impact, there's two sides, right? There's, like, the societal impact. And of course, we all strive to, like, make things that help society, help specific people with problems. That's what drives us as designers, right? And that's all fine and good, and that should really be at the core of why we do what we do. The second part is, like, business impact, right? And that's something that, designers have had to deal with that forever, right? It's like, at the end of the day, that's the difference between art and design. And it's not to say there's not a lot of creativity you bring to the practice of design, but to really have a business impact, it really starts with understanding business. And so when you're a designer, particularly when you're working for a company or a startup or any size entity, in fact, or even if it's a nonprofit, you have to understand, like, what is that business model? I know a lot of us are familiar with the terms like B2B and B2C and B2B2C, two-sided marketplaces, even nonprofits. But you really have to understand, like, what is the value exchange? What is the money, the data, the advertising, the partnerships? You really have to understand that. And I'll kind of keep going on this for a minute. Like, it's like, how do you do that, though, right? Now we're talking about, like, measuring design. And so for a lot of designers, that's really, really hard. It's hard for design, period, because we think about what we do and we're asked to, like, connect what we do to the business. And so a lot of times it really has to start with, measuring what we can measure as designers, like things that are measured by design heuristics and usability. It could be feature completion. It could be, in the e-commerce world, maybe like cart abandonment, or, the kind of more social stuff like dwell time on videos, things like that. But you have to take it the next step further. You have to really understand the analytics, the metrics that your teams, your colleagues measure. That might be feature adoption. That might be cost savings or less support tickets. You really have to make that next jump of connecting the work that you do with those other metrics that your other teams, your partners are responsible for.
Yeah, I cannot agree more. I feel like one of the biggest lessons I have learned in my career is, like, understanding the business model, understanding what I'm designing for in a bigger picture instead of just, like, only focusing on the experience itself. I guess, like, from that, do you have any questions you would think, like, oh, I wish I asked that before in my earlier career?
Yeah, I mean, it's a hard question, but I'll kind of answer it a little bit generically and then personally. So generically, the question is, like, what do I want to be when I grow up, right? And it's the one thing I have to say. This is the personal side. Is I am just too interested in too many things, even today. Now that's served me well in my career, being a generalist essentially. But at the same time, there is extreme value in being an expert at certain things. That's the whole debate about generalist versus a specialist. And I will just say that it has to be at the right time for you personally, what you want to do, the right time in your career. I do think that, this argument, you can argue with people back and forth all day long, but really it's an individual choice, right? I think earlier in career, it's very valuable to be a generalist, but at certain points in your career, it can be really, really incredibly important to advance, to change to another company, to decide that you want to explore a different skill set, or when you're making the transition to like lead teams and management, where you do have to lean into being more an expert in certain areas.
So when you are mentioning like communicating that design value to the business partner, what's some of the tips you want to share or advice? Like how can a designer better communicate the impact of the design?
Yeah, I mean, we talked about like all of those metrics.
Yeah.
And, that is definitely the thing, right? So we've spent as designers, and, this will get me back on that little bit of a rant about design thinking, right? We shared our process. We invited others into our process. What that has done is sort of like brought designers back into a narrower box. Now, of course, it's important. We have to remember that our work is really about execution. All of that process, design thinking and everything, it's still great. I still tell people, invite your colleagues and your partners into that process. But we have to stop being so concerned about the process. At the end of the day, it's about executing. We have to execute the work. We have to get it done efficiently. We have to make good decisions. So again, I'll sort of like twist my answer a little bit here, getting back to like having an impact in a different way is also about having influence. And the way you have influence is, again, it gets really tactical from a social and a relationship perspective. Like you really have to understand your cross-functional partner's responsibilities, the things that they care about every day. That's going to put you in a better position to negotiate, to make a strong case for a direction, to make a strong case for doing user research when that's optional, to influence the importance of a particular insight, whether it's a data insight or it's a qualitative research insight or it's a prototype validation test. It earns you that right to speak louder with your opinion, your thoughts, your suggestions. And so there's also that kind of impact. And that really comes about by really being aligned with your partners on, that shared vision. But really, at the end of the day, you do have a shared vision. You're all trying to be successful with the work that you're trying to do, the audiences you're trying to serve. But you really have to meet other people, where their responsibilities lie as well. I will say, just kind of ending this answer, is recognizing that it is very hard. There's a lot of things as designers, that are our responsibility and things that we want to accomplish and fight for, evangelize for the user, the end customer. So it is a lot of work, but you do have to work at it.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think like sometime when I was collaborating with the cross-functional team, what I feel like is, okay, I'm designing for PMs and engineers to understand their perspective. Because I think like the superpower as a designer is empathy, right? Like understanding what is their perspective and to see if I can find a solution for them. I think like that will help you influence and give you a stronger point for kind of like conversation or collaboration, for sure.
Absolutely. I mean, we're aligned right there, right? So I mentioned that as well. Empathy is not just for your end users and your customers, it's for your collaborators. And you just nailed it.
In your career, you must have listened to a lot of career advice. Is there any common career advice for designers that you actually don't agree with?
That I don't agree with. So this depends on your level, but I'd say one advice that I hear a lot is that, it's almost counter what I said earlier, is that you have to be an expert at something. Now, when I say an expert at something here, I don't mean like a skill or the practice of design. I mean literally tools, right? So we all aspire to be really good at specific tools. And don't get me wrong, you have to be good at tools. That's what you use to execute your work. But I just always caution people to not get too caught up in being an expert at a specific tool. And it could be a design tool, like today, of course, that means Figma for most people. But for an engineer, it might be a specific programming language. I have this slide in this talk I've given before that literally lists like about 100 different software programs. And I've considered myself across my career, anywhere from proficient to expert at them. It doesn't matter. That's not what you want to be known for, right? And that's not what makes good designers. That's not what builds their reputation. It's on quality. It's on attention to detail. It's on creativity. It's on, are they a really excellent collaborator that I want to work with? Now, you need to be good at tools to do the execution, but those are the kind of things you want to be known for.
I feel like one of the piece advice I don't always agree with is like, you always need to be data driven. Because I feel like designer is creating innovations. Sometimes the data can only tell you so much, and you need to make that leap or trust your intuition. Right? Like to make that judgment call, I feel like sometimes it's based on your empathy for the users.
Yeah, I really love that. It's funny because as product designers specifically, we do strike that balance, right, between qualitative research and interviews and quantitative research, data, insights, metrics. And it is very hard. There's a great book, Just Enough Research. Most people know about it, by Erica Hall. It's great. The sense that it's valuable to be data-driven. And that's true in a lot of cases. I don't want to steal other people's buzzwords here, but it's really to be data-informed. You ultimately have to make decisions. And I think what you said is really important, especially as designers get higher up in level. Your experience is really valuable. It's how you make decisions. Mm-hmm. You say empathy, and another way that people describe it is when you have worked at a couple companies or worked on a great range of projects, products, types of things, you do start having instincts. And that is really valuable. And I think it really comes into play a lot when you start to be a manager or a team lead, where you get to lean on that more and more. And a big part of that is just speaking up.